Tommy Best, and you're listening to today's Boondoggle.
This is Mark Metcalf, and you are listening to today's Boondoggle with Bailey on Domain Cleveland Radio.
You are listening to today's Boondoggle with Bailey on Domain Cleveland Radio. Yes, Kato Kalin listens to this all the time.
Welcome to today's Boondoggle. Now here's your host. Inkcarceration, America's rock, metal, and tattoo festival with Slipknot, Falling in Reverse, Five Finger Death Punch, plus Marilyn Manson, 3 Days Grace, Beartooth, Knocked Loose, Lamb of God, Parkway Drive, I Prevail, In This Moment, and so many more. Report to the Ohio State Reformatory on July 18th through 20th, 2025 to face your sentencing. 3 days of rock, tattoos, and the return of the Haunted Blood Prison. Passes for Inkcarceration are on sale now at inkcarceration.com. Zombified.
What's going on, everybody? It's Bill Bailey with today's Boondoggle, and excited to be catching up with Cliff from the band Dry Kill Logic. How you doing, man?
Good, man. How about you? Pleasure to be here.
I'm doing good, man. I'm just looking forward to having this conversation, man, having you guys back out and playing and everything. I wasn't sure if I'd ever have a chance to get this interview in, so pretty excited, man.
Dude, I can't tell you I ever thought we'd be back out here playing either, but it's awesome to be here with you, man. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Great, dude. Hey, so usually when I have people on for the first time, though, I like to do a background. So do you remember originally what you wanted to be when you grew up?
I'll be honest. I'm not sure I had any like true aspirations when I was a kid. I was kind of just finding myself and trying to figure it out. I think I liked the idea of maybe being an architect or maybe going into the military, but I can't say I had any sort of real idea early on.
And you know when it was that like music kind of caught your ear, and who were some of your like earliest influences?
It's wild, man. I heard Tom Morello say this, and I thought that it was really impactful. I didn't find music found me. And what I mean by that was, I was just a kid with no direction that didn't really have any sort of idea of what was interesting or compelling. And then all of a sudden I started to discover bands in high school, Metallica and Anthrax, and started to see and start to learn a little bit more about the heavy metal scene back then. I mean, I'm, an old soul. So back in the 80s, in my formative years, watching that sort of thrash scene unfold on the East Coast and, just getting to know about these bands, and then, East Coast hardcore and New England hardcore as I graduated high school and started to get into my 20s. And that really started to shape the type of musician I wanted to be. And then early Pantera, in the 90s, and then the kind of formation and explosion of the nu metal genre, I think for me, timed very well with when I discovered who I was becoming as a musician. I don't know, and the rest is history, I guess.
Yeah, it sounds like we're pretty close in age, though. So it sounded like my formative years in high school and everything like that as well, man. So I feel you there.
Right.
And then, like, what was like where you grew up at? What was the music scene like?
There was no music scene. I grew up in Westchester County, which is like north of the Bronx, south of Connecticut. It's like a quiet suburb where people that work in the city go, to live. And there wasn't much of a scene out here. There was some live music venues. The one that we played at all the time was called 7 Willow Street. And it was a 600 capacity room that would get bands that were on tour that like either weren't big enough to play the city or weren't booked in the city and were headed to Poughkeepsie or headed to New Haven. So we would get a lot of the bands in their first album, second album coming through, early Manson, early Busta Rhymes, early Seven Dust, Stuck Mojo. The list goes on and on. Cold Chamber, Motorhead. Like the venue used to get shows like that, and then we were, being one of the biggest local bands, we would always get chosen to open for them. And that venue and that connection to that venue and those artists it's really what built the foundation of the group. It allowed us to, learn who we were as musicians, but also be in a position to like take advantage of that hard work. It wasn't like you're always playing in some, dumpy little covers bar type scenario where nobody's really coming to hear new music. This gave us an opportunity to get in front of like-minded bands and like-minded audiences. So it's pretty cool.
That's awesome. Yeah. So when did like Dry Kill Logic actually like come together? And what was the inspiration for the name?
Yeah, I like to say that we've been hardcore since '94, which is when the band truly began, in my mom's basement back then. And, we spent 6-7 years touring the East Coast just in a shitty little smoky van, releasing our independent, CDs, putting them out through disc makers and burning 1,000 of them and trying to sell them everywhere we could. We signed a production deal in 2000 with a company called Scrap 60, which was Eddie Wall and Rob Caggiano and Steve Regina. And we began working on what would eventually become The Darker Side of Nonsense. And we signed with Roadrunner in 2001. And then from there, we went the route of independent and continued writing music and releasing it. And then here we are today.
Nice. And then, I was reading that before Dry Kill Logic, you started a band. You're in a band called Hinge. Now, not to be confused with the dating app I met my girlfriend on currently or whatever. But when did Hinge come together for you?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. And leading into the part of the question I didn't answer about the band name. So the band that started in the 90s, we were called Hinge. And then when we signed with Roadrunner, we signed as Hinge. But what we had not done until that point was any sort of legal due diligence to actually understand if we could professionally be known as Hinge, which we couldn't. There was, unbeknownst to me, I'm not a copyright lawyer by any means, but within copyright law, there are certain segments of industry. And if you own a particular name in that particular segment of industry, it excludes anyone else from being able to use it. There was a recording studio based out of Chicago with the name Hinge, which precluded a band being able to share the name because it fell into that music and entertainment vertical within copyright law. If we were a hair salon and we wanted to be named Hinge, it would have been fine, but that didn't work. So we needed to change the name. The name Dry Kill Logic, we happened upon. Our old drummer Phil we were in the studio and he happened to be flipping through a recording console manual, just bored flipping through this manual. And if you know anything about recording consoles, they are a collection of buttons and knobs. This one button that was on there is called a logic button. And a logic button is simply just a push button. This push button, this logic button, controlled two signals that would go into it at the same time. The wet signal and the dry signal. The wet signal is like my voice with reverb. The dry signal is just my voice, right? That button allows you to separate them. The act of pushing that logic button would kill the dry signal and only let the wet affected signal through. So when you looked at that on a system flow chart, the act of depressing that button was called Dry Kill Logic because that was the logic button that killed the dry signal. So it showed up as Dry Kill Logic. And my drummer read it and he was like, well, that's a sick name. And we were like, yeah, too bad we don't need a band name. Fast forward, 18 months later. And we were like, hey, what was that name you had again? You found in that manual? And thankfully, it worked out. We had no other name we could have thought of. So it was really, Dry Kill Logic or bust at that point.
Nice. And then that was, of course, before the days of Google and all that stuff to find out what else is, what other band names are taken. That's why you got the legal teams, right, to find that for you. And then, so as you were saying, you guys, it was kind of like they had that 600 capacity venue that you started playing at with some of the bigger names. Like when those bands came through and you guys got to like open for them, was that like, what was that experience like? And was that like kind of like, almost like college courses or something for what would happen later on when you guys got signed with Roadrunner and stuff?
Yeah, I would say that was definitely a crash course in the music business and the live entertainment industry. I think my dog is about to make a cameo here. So I think what we found was that we had no idea how like touring life worked, or how bands were transported, or what a sound check was, or what it was like to roll with your own crew. I mean, we were young kids. We were barely in our 20s. So just to be able to observe all of these other groups and acts, and the way that they kind of engaged with the audiences, the way that they rolled into a venue, the things that they did first, the things that they did last, right? We just were able to kind of absorb that. And in some instances, we had some really great stories. Des from Coal Chamber was incredibly gracious to us when Coal Chamber played 7 Willow Street and we opened for them. He invited us on the bus. We smoked a joint with him, and he allowed us an access that we would have never been privy to. And I remember sitting on the bus listening to stories about how they had just come off tour with, it was either Pantera or Megadeth, and they were about to go on tour with either Pantera or Megadeth. I don't remember with the order of it, but it was just, I remember thinking like, man, if this is anything that I could possibly be, I'll see you later. I guess you didn't like my story. It's a commonplace in my house. Nobody wants to listen to these stories. But I just remember thinking like, if I could have a life that was 10% of something like this, boy, I would feel like I had really arrived. And I think that perspective was really great. So yeah, tons of great stories, lots of awesome interactions, and a tremendous amount of knowledge.
And then taking that, like, as you guys got signed and stuff, and then taking a lot of that stuff on the road with you, who were some of, like the story that Des shared with you, who were some of the bands you got to go, out with that you didn't think you would have been able to go play with?
I mean, from being signed, I think going out on the road with Fear Factory on the first record was an absolute dream come true. Probably the best tour we've ever done. It was the first. We were direct support for months. They took us out everywhere in the U.S., and that elevated our profile in a way that just would have been impossible without it. And, we were very young, and we were able to, have artists open for us and hang out with them. And, that kind of relationship just continues to this day. We really enjoy headlining and having local artists open for us. We enjoy spending time with them. We just, we just vibe on the whole thing. And I think that's, was ingrained in us early on, both, in our formative years, unsigned, being allowed to open for these bigger artists at 7 Willow Street, to having Fear Factory take us out on the road, to, paying it forward any way we can by offering support slots to local bands. I mean, again, we don't play a lot, but when we do, we definitely don't think about it in terms of like package tours. We think about it in ways of like, are there awesome local bands that can open for us that in 3 years are going to be the next big thing? Because that's a way better story for us to be a part of than it is like, hey, we put together this package tour and we're coming to you like everybody else. We'd rather do something that's fun and, work with tomorrow's bands today. That's really interesting, I think.
And what was it that, I mean, I understand, like, us, like I was saying, us being kind of close in age, I can understand like family and responsibilities and stuff come into picture. But what was it that, where you guys decided, hey, we needed to take a hiatus?
There was no like overarching thing. Like, it wasn't like, oh, there's some crippling addiction problem or some really bad personality conflict, or there was none of that. Every album you make, you're getting dealt a hand, in life. Is this going to be as strong a hand as the last hand that I had, right? The last album, am I going to do as much? Am I going to be even more successful? Will I continue to grow and continue to build? And, when we released A Vengeance and Violence, we just didn't get the hand. Our label at the time, remember, we were a fully independent group in 2006. We had small backing. It was really just tied to a distribution deal that we could take advantage of at a time when independent, like, streaming and distribution deals didn't really exist. We were self-funded for the most part. We were, I managed the band. So there wasn't a lot of opportunities to have external lines of thought when it came to like, how do we take advantage of relationships? How do we use leverage? We just didn't have those things. We were always a blue collar metal band that would take any tour that was given to us and work real hard to earn fans, and, just did everything that we could control to, provide a great experience. If you came to a 200 cap room, we wanted you to feel like you were in a 2000 cap room. We give you that show, but we never really had the capacity to get any bigger. And when that record, when we put out A Vengeance and Violence, our record label had folded. They just, run out of money. It was 2006, the beginning of like the financial crisis, the real estate bust, all of those things. And, that funding, I think, was tied to some of those things that went under. So the label goes under. All of a sudden, we don't have the distribution. We don't have the money. We didn't have an agent. We didn't have a manager to kind of tell us, like, guys, this is how you regroup and move forward. And again, like, we just kind of looked down when we were all 18 years old. We looked up, we were 34. And it's like, holy shit, well, what do we do now? And we just became friends. I mean, we're still incredibly close to this day. We maintained our friendship. That's what we needed to move forward with, not another record or another tour. I mean, that's fine. But moving forward with our friendship was the part that, like, we were, most kind of excited about. You could take the rest of it, but as long as we're all just close and friends and maintain that relationship, then that's fine. That's cool too. Instead of being in a studio in a bus, we'll just go have dinner somewhere and we'll hang out and we'll talk about being in a band in a bus. You know what I mean? Like, that's fine. That's fine too. So it's all good there, but no real reason. Just didn't get the hand that we needed. Gotcha. But obviously that remaining close, like you were saying, and that friendship, you guys still got the itch. And back in 2018, you put Vices out. I mean, what was it that kind of like, was it discussed, like, when you guys were all hanging out, like, what, we should write something, and I mean, just got inspired to put something else out for the fans? Yeah, I think, you spend 10 years talking about back when you used to do something, and there's a natural progression in conversation to, well, what if we started to do it now? Right. And I think in 2016, we decided, like, oh, let's go back into the studio and dust off these instruments and see what it's like to be a band again. And, I liken it to, the only comparison I can give, it's like having an old laptop that's been in the bottom of your closet for a decade, and you have no idea where the power cord is, or you find it kind of in a shoebox, and you're like, does this thing even work anymore? Like, because it had all the keys, like, I don't remember, but all my memories and all my photos are in this computer. So I want to turn it on and I want to revisit that and see what that's like. And I think for us, that was the exercise. Like, you turn the computer back on, it's a little slower than you remember it. Screen's not quite as clear as maybe it was 10 years ago. The Q button is a little funky, but everything you remember is kind of exactly as it was. And that's what the exercise for writing was for us. And, when we were in those sessions, which were about 2 years, to your point, like 2016 to 2018, we were writing and kind of getting the songs together. And that session, that era of the band, produced Vices, Don't See Ghosts, and then the framework for what would become Now You Belong with the Dead. And we decided, hey, let's just release a song here, let's release a song there. But we didn't really have any intention. The cards that we had been dealt 10 years before were still the cards that we had, so we weren't necessarily looking to, like, step back to the table. But we knew that there were audiences that were asking for music. So we said, shit, we like these songs. We feel like they're a pretty good representation of who we are. Let's see if the fans think we do. Let's see if the audiences think we do. And then that was kind of it. There wasn't really a lot more thought beyond that. Gotcha. And then, as you mentioned, your latest single, Now You Belong with the Dead, what was like the inspiration or message with that track? What was, to put? Yeah, there is definitely inspiration for those lyrics and a story behind them, but I'll choose to keep that to myself for now. But what I would say is that we all have, experiences that leave impressions, right? And as I start to think about songwriting and messaging and how to get my point across. I think I realize in these moments that everybody feels these same senses, the same range of emotions, right? When something happens to you, it's usually shock, then sadness, then anger, and then acceptance. And that range of emotions, I think, is captured in this song. That was my intent, was to try to get across not just one of them in the experience of, stimulus and response, but really try to map out that journey. And I think the song title also did a really good job of encapsulating the emotion too.
Yeah, definitely. And then, is there any talk about, a new album?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when we did Now You Belong with the Dead, we had the opportunities to play the live shows, and we recognized that this was probably a good time to release some music. We have ideas, but we would need to take those from, inception and kind of complete them. And we had Now You Belong with the Dead, the framework of it from the other writing sessions. So we really enjoyed the process of finishing the song and then going into the studio and recording it with Greg Thomas, who's a guitar player from End. He's produced a variety of amazing fucking bands, and he's just the best, most gracious producer. He made us feel very comfortable. And that's, the foundation of a really great recording. So it gave us, we left there with tremendous energy and a lot of inertia towards getting through these shows and then starting the writing process again, building a complete body of work that we feel really comfortable about, and then releasing it in some capacity, an album, a collection of EPs, 12 single, I don't know, whatever the right way is to do it. But I think a body of work is something that we're really excited to pursue after these shows, conclude. Nice.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I seen that you guys were working with Greg Thomas and also got to work with Will Putney. What was that experience like?
I mean, both of them are thought leaders in recorded music, in songwriting, but it's their ability, I think, to hear beyond what the band can hear, even in their own minds as they're writing the song, right? Like to quote the Sopranos, you're always thinking 10 steps ahead, Tone, right? Like they're always kind of thinking, as you're kind of thinking about how you're going to finish it, they're thinking about how to take the finished thing beyond any, right? And that's the part that I was most amazed by was, Greg's ability to see beyond the immediate in like what a song could be, how it could sound, how it could be structured. And then Will, his ability to, take that master and, really that final mix and just expand it within a master and, make it sound even bigger. And I think the fact that, Will and Greg are in End together and share a lot of musical synergies and similarities when it comes to these types of things just allows for an even greater path of least resistance. So it's like there's no ambiguity on like what success is. It's like, no, this is the sound, right? Oh, I totally get it. Yep, this is okay, great. You get it, I get it. And you find folks just finishing each other's sentences, and that's where, musically, you're going to get to a great product.
Nice. Yeah, and then speaking of the shows now, I mean, you went from like, hanging out getting together for the barbecue or whatever and talking about being in the van and the good old days of playing shows and stuff. And now you had your first show, here in the States in 20 years at Welcome to Rockville, at this major festival. What was that like?
The whole thing was surreal. We have a wonderful agent, and I blame her for all of this. I think, she came to us late last year with the opportunity and the offer from Danny Wimmer Presents and Welcome to Rockville. And we were just blown away. I mean, she's the fairy godmother. She makes all these things happen, and all these opportunities are really because of her. But the opportunity to play these shows, when they were presented, they were just, the only emotion I can say that we felt consistent is just grateful. Those are hallowed halls, you know, the Welcome to Rockvilles and all the Danny Wimmer Presents rosters, those stages, you know, those are where the biggest of the big are allowed to perform. And the fact that we command any time on those stages or a part of those conversations is, you know, it's not lost on us, the gravity of that. And, you know, when these opportunities were presented, we just took them very seriously, and we were just very grateful for them, and we just remain grateful, and we would just like to remain humble during all of this and come out, put on the best shows possible, to be very thankful for being there. You know, and that's kind of it, man. The whole thing is just so surreal that we're just very grateful for it all.
Yeah, I was, you know, I was going to ask, like, you know, that first show back after 20 years live here in the U.S. I mean, thinking back, like you mentioned, 7 Willow Street, you know, and then you guys come off of that stage at a festival. I mean, and you're coming down off of that. What was going through your guys' heads?
Yeah, I mean, the 20-something-year-old version of me is staring at the 50-something-year-old version of me in complete awe, I think. I'm not sure at any point in those years when we were touring and really, you know, punching walls at times, it felt like, you know, other times it was like a knife fight in a dark alley to get from, you know, one place to another. And I can't tell you we would have ever imagined 20 years later sustaining a career, being in a bigger opportunity than ever, having audiences discover us on platforms we never would have imagined, through formats we couldn't even conceive. You know, we're a band that started at cassette tapes and ended at MySpace. YouTube hadn't even been invented by the time we had broken up. And if you had told me that decades later, people would stream music and wouldn't own it, and it would turn from, you know, something you owned to something you consumed, and like I couldn't have imagined it. So to be here now, it's again, grateful is the overarching emotion.
Nice. But I bet after that adrenaline wore off and stuff, you're like reminded that, oh shit, I'm 50 years old now.
Yeah, I mean, you know, things move fast. I knew how old I was going in, I'll be honest with you. The adrenaline wasn't moving until we got on stage. But yeah, I mean, you know, you can't help but kind of cosmically realize, you know, where you are today, where you were then, you know, who you are now, who you were then. Like, all of this stuff is very present and obvious. But I don't find myself in competition with the last version of the band that was on stage. I'm not going to out energy my 20-year-old self. It's not going to happen. What I can possibly do is outperform my 20-year-old self. Instead of looking at energy as an inertia as the foundational principles of a good live show, now I think about performance and the sound and quality of my voice and how well the songs are represented in that arena of live music for that audience. To me, if you can close your eyes and feel like you're listening to the band the way you've consumed it for the last 20 years without us playing live, then we've done our job. But the last thing I want to do is come up there and try to be something I'm not and tarnish the audience's reputation with these songs. Because quite fairly, you've lived with these songs a lot longer than you've lived with me playing them, especially in a live setting. So when we come out, our goal is to honor them and honor your relationship with them by doing the best we can.
Yeah, see, wisdom does come with age, you know? And then what I'm excited about is, like, you guys are going to be playing, speaking of the festivals, Inkcarceration coming up here. It's in my backyard, so I'll get to see it live and experience it. Excellent. But are you guys pretty stoked about playing at the site of Shawshank Redemption? I don't know if you're a fan of that film, but
I am. You know, and I think I think it's awesome. You know, Danny Wimmer and the entire organization do a really good job of, like, thinking through the experience for the audience. You know, it's one thing to put a festival in a field, right? It's a whole nother thing to put a festival in a prison. It's another thing to put a festival in the infield of Daytona International Speedway. And I think that's where we're most excited, because it's not just playing an amazing festival to an amazing audience. It's in an amazing environment. So to your point, super excited just to soak it all in. And we go on very early that day, so we have plenty of time to spend walking around and kind of checking it all out. So
yeah, definitely do the tours there, man, for sure.
Yeah, that's what I'm stoked for. Just all that stuff, just to enjoy it and to take it all in and kind of be in that moment. Yeah, that's the fun stuff right there.
That's great, man. And then also I see you guys have a show coming up at the Monarch in Brooklyn to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the Dead and the Dreaming album. Do you think you're like, I mean, you already got through the Welcome to Rockville, you know, playing in front of that big crowd, you know, and you're excited for the new location to play, you know, the Mansfield Reformatory, you know, Inkcarceration. But is this one a little bit more on your nerves because it's closer to home and, you know, where it all started?
You know, it's a different type of nervous energy. You know, the first show, the big shows, those carry a weight and a responsibility with them for sure. But at the same time, so do these smaller, more intimate shows as well. And to your point, so it's Friday the 13th, we're playing the Monarch in Brooklyn, New York. And then Saturday the 14th, we're playing Dingbats in Clifton, New Jersey. Both of them are small, intimate venues, far more familiar to us from the types of rooms we played in the past versus these larger stages. So super excited to, you know, have these headline shows essentially where we could play a longer set, we could play some deeper cuts, we could be more thoughtful about introducing songs we've never played before or songs we never had the opportunity to play live in the States. I mean, we never toured in the US on Vengeance and Violence, and the European tour that we played and the Australian tour we played, we only played one song from that album because we were still in the throes of the Dead and Dreaming, and you know, people were still very interested in the Darker Side of Nonsense. So these shows allow us to dive into the new singles. We can think about A Vengeance and Violence. Obviously, we'll play the songs that folks are, you know, very interested in from the first two albums. So it's a much wider opportunity to think about what a set list could look like. And then again, I also have to be prepared that it's not a 30-minute set anymore. It's a 75-minute set, which is, you know, taxing on these old bones that hasn't been on stage in a long time. But I have what it has taught me is I have a profound measure of respect for all touring musicians. I just simply forgot how hard live performance was. And I'm pretty good with working out and whatnot, but there's no workout for those muscles. Absolutely not. You just got to get up there on that stage. So excited to just get back in the rhythm of it, you know.
Nice. Well, talking about like getting back in the rhythm. So is there any thoughts of going back out on the road after getting through these shows?
You know, I think for now, the plan as we sort of think about it is get through 2025. You know, we'll have these shows. We're really just excited to get back into the markets that we haven't been in a while. First time back in Ohio, man. We played Ohio so often. Getting back to Wisconsin with Rockfest. We played Wisconsin. I played so many places in Wisconsin, California. So just to be back in familiar settings for us is a tremendous first start, especially with the scale that these festivals allow. Come home, we start to think about writing music. We spend the summer, we spend the fall, the winter, the spring kind of thinking about that. And, you know, who knows? Hopefully we're in a similar position to this one next year where we could think about more headline shows. We could start to think about more festival runs. Maybe we open it up to Europe. I don't think anything's off the table. But again, like, I think we just have to be, you know, thoughtful about how we approach our time and our energy. And as long as we're taking the right steps forward, then yeah, we're open to all opportunities.
Nice. I think you guys hit Cleveland a few times back in the day at Peabody's, maybe.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, love Cleveland, Columbus, Dayton. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Bellefontaine, Fat Cats. God, I played Fat Cats 3 or 4 times in my life in Bellefontaine, Ohio. There's a few of them. To be fair, I just have to pull up an itinerary. I might even shock and awe you.
Yeah.
How many places played.
Well, I'm in Cleveland, so like I'm used to, you know.
Oh, you get them all then. Yeah. You get all the shows. Nice.
But well, then I mean, obviously too with that, like you were saying, you know, when you guys played until like MySpace, and then, you know, now you're back with the streaming, the internet, and everything the way it is today, but also with a whole new, you know, group of you know, new fans to make. A bunch of new kids that have never even heard of you guys before or seen you play or whatever. For any of those people in the audience that want to check you guys out that might not be able to make like a live show, you know, where would you send them?
Listen, I would send you to YouTube because there's a really great, the audience is doing a really great job of posting content from our live performances from all angles with pretty good sound. So I would say that if you're interested in kind of seeing what the band is about nowadays, best place to go is to YouTube. We've talked about live streaming shows. We've talked about recording and releasing professional, video of a live event, live from Flint, Michigan, or live from San Diego, like spending the time in the inertia. I think there's a lot of opportunities. We just need to measure them as to how we roll them out. But we're not against anything right now. And knowing that there's a lot of places that we can't be to play a live show, we're interested in whatever opportunities we can. But at a short-term foundational basis, there seems to be a ton of content up on YouTube from Rockville. So I would say YouTube for now, until we kind of get our act together, remains the best place.
I gotcha, man. I got into this podcasting game after years of, being a local promoter in Cleveland, and just, I'm an older dude now, and it's just like, it just, the hits, the likes, the subscription, all that stuff now is like, it's like, dude, I'm not a TikTok dancer and shit like that. I go to my daughters for that kind of stuff. Like, hey, help me get some hits and likes on the page or whatever. I'm just about having conversations and keeping it real with like-minded dudes my age,
No, it's true. And, to that point, again, we didn't really think about anything band related over the last, 20 some odd years. The only reason we even got our social handles, to be fair, was because we didn't want anybody squatting on them and like posting weird ass content out there on like, dry kill handles on Twitter. Like, what is this account? So we scooped them, but we were always kind of conscious that it would feel really disingenuous if we built some crazy social profile or tone of voice or approach without new music or playing live. Like, it just felt like the wrong focus, and people would just be like, why are you tweeting? Go into the studio and make a record. So we scooped them, but we never really did anything with them. So now, we have audiences and they're engaged, and I don't know. We're just trying to figure it out, to your point. Like, yeah. I realize the stuff I post on Instagram doesn't work on TikTok, doesn't work on Twitter. And it's just a fascinating exercise. And thankfully, we're all fast learners to the best of our abilities. But it is a really interesting observation when you have no context to kind of step back into this landscape now as it's kind of, fully realized, and be like, hey, where do I start? Nobody starts, like we're starting right now. But again, it's an experience unique to us. So we just embrace it and we'll figure it out. It doesn't really fucking matter, but we'll figure it out.
Exactly. Well, Cliff, man, it's been great catching up with you and talking with you, dude. I really appreciate the conversation. I want to ask you a couple questions real quick before we wrap up. Some of the questions I asked my guests that I have on. Speaking as we were talking earlier, with age comes wisdom. Looking back, what class do you feel should be mandatory today before graduating high school? I would love to see today's home economics put back into schools, and not so much for the cooking and whatnot, but an evolved one that includes things like shop class, that includes things like financial literacy, that includes things like how to be responsible and maintain a household, right? Like, I think that those humanities have been lost in the formative years. And whether it's working with your hands in shop and learning how to build things and feeling comfortable with tools at a young age, or the things you learned in Boy Scouts about how to light a fire or how to pitch a tent, or, the importance of water safety, coupled with the idea of how to be a responsible adult, whether that is financial literacy or, emotional, integrity, all these different things. So I would say if there was an evolution of what we used to consider home ec, put back into a class, retitled How to Exist as a Human in Today's Society, I think that might be beneficial for high school audiences. I agree, man. One of the number one answers I get when I ask that question is, like you touched on, financial literacy, how to do my taxes and stuff like that. They teach you how to spend money and buy a bunch of crap you don't need, but budgeting and saving and,
just the idea,
all
to
that.
your point, the rigor, the need for rigor, right? Like, we know how to spend. Maybe you shouldn't spend. Who's teaching you when not to spend? What are the markers you look for? What are the measures of success over time you should be looking for, right? We don't have any foundational, it's either we have all the money or we have no money. So like, how do you build a continuum of success where you know that you don't need to see it now? You understand literacy occurs in 30, 40 years from now, but you need to build, right? It's the perspective, the context. That's the part to your point around literacy, financial literacy, that I think would be really helpful. Just shit for me too, for everybody. I mean, everyone's looking for this level of education and enlightenment to some extent. So feels net positive.
Yeah, and you go back to what you were saying, like with the Boy Scout training, how to start a fire and stuff like that. It's like, okay, yeah, there might be some YouTube tutorials out there to help a kid out or something with that. But what do you do when there's no YouTube? We become so dependent on technology. It's just like, what do you do when they cut that off?
I've also found that tactile exercises train your brain better than, passive exercises, right? So like, if you type something, you'll remember it maybe, but if you write it, you create maybe a deeper connection to the thought because it takes you longer. You have to form that thought with another part of your body, including your brain, right? Like there's a way to think about it. And it's funny. I don't know when I learned the right way to light a fire in the, pyramid style, put the kindling in the middle, light from the bottom, right? It's got to be up and then you create the thing, right? I don't know, but I know I learned it in Boy Scouts or in Cub Scouts, right? And I know I've carried that with me kind of unconsciously for years, along with, things I probably didn't retain, like knots and all this other stuff. But I wish I could recall that now. I wish I knew all that stuff as well as I knew it back then. And to your point, there may be tutorials, but the idea of actually being out in the cold and having to light the fire to get warm, nothing's going to teach you that. And if you want a really good lesson, don't light the fire under a snowy tree, right? I don't know if you learn these things just by observing somebody else doing them versus, you watch them because they know how to do it, but they didn't learn that from a YouTube video. They learned it from going out in the woods to light a fire. So what is that replacement? Like how, what do you need to do first in order to really burn that knowledge in? Listen, that's for minds smarter than mine. I only know the way I did things coming up. And, to your point, today's mind might not approach things the way my mind did in, decades ago. But those types of things I think are just formative no matter how they're approached. I think if you get them early and you teach them early, regardless of format or how it's done, it's just important to know that stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And then who are 3 people who've inspired you and you can credit for making you the person you are today?
Me, and me. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. I mean, you look at your parents during your formative years and you realize that they give you, spoken and unspoken support, in the times that you need it. I've had bosses over the years that have allowed me opportunities to grow, whether it's, professionally or personally. And then, I've worked alongside artists in professional capacities, but also, as a musician and, been able to see and experience things. So I don't know if I have like a 1, 2, 3, these are my idols and mentors. I think that, again, I'm grateful to have been in a lot of positions where I've been able to learn from people, and they're allowing me to be in those moments to absorb that knowledge is really what I'm grateful for. There's probably just too many to name, to be honest. It takes a village to raise a child.
Oh yeah, definitely. And then speaking of child, do you recall your favorite toy when you were a child?
When I was very young, maybe 5, I had my father's cousin, who we looked at as an uncle, but cousin, my father's cousin. So there wasn't we were all very close, but it's not like he was my father's brother, he's my father's cousin. He bought me a kid's drum set, and he did it to piss my parents off, just to give me something very loud in the house. Not because he cared about me being a drummer. He just thought it was funny. But I remember getting that drum set and being fascinated by it. So that's the earliest memory I have of being connected at all to anything musical. And now, whenever I have any of my friends have kids, I buy them all baby drum sets when they're like 3 or 4, right around the same age as a first instrument, largely to also piss off their parents, because that's the part I enjoy the most. But if the kid takes to the drums the same way I did, who knows? Who knows what's possible in this life? But I sure do love seeing agitated young parents.
Awesome. And then any message that you have for our military members that are currently serving overseas?
Yes, thank you for everything. These are trying, crazy times right now, and you put yourselves in harm's way for the benefit of all of us every day. I know you're far braver and far tougher than I am, so all I would continue to say is thank you. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you for the commitment you make every day to be away from home, to be away from the things that you love and enjoy, for a greater good. It's very much appreciated, duly noted, and very much appreciated.
Awesome. Cliff, man, once again, thank you so much for your time. It was great, great
sir.
speaking with you, man. Could I ask one last favor before I let you go?
Please and thank you. Go for it.
You mind cutting a promo ID for the show? Just introduce yourself, and you're listening to today's Boondoggle.
You got it. Just let me know when I'm good to go, just right now.
Yeah, whenever you're good.
Hey, what's up? This is Cliff from Dry Kill Logic, and you are listening to today's Boondoggle.
Awesome. See, it's like riding a bike, man. You still got the promo skills too and everything.
Old habits die hard, my friend.
Was this the first promo in over 20 years now too?
No, but there's not been many. There's not been many. So it's one of a handful, maybe 5. So
awesome. All right, thanks a lot for your time, man. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you, buddy. Hopefully we'll spend some time together in person in Ohio.
Yeah, in the prison.
Well, when you put it that way, dude.
See you then, man. Take care.
Talk to you later, man. Bye-bye.